Do you suffer from imposter syndrome, or is it possible that you really are an imposter? Hi everybody, my name is Greg Crable, and this is my podcast, Something I Learned Yesterday, where I explain an issue, usually from the world of publishing, in just a few minutes. I frequently hear concern about imposter syndrome. My immediate reaction to the concept of imposter syndrome is that it's your conscience telling you that you're really not all that. Although I'll admit it's more complicated, as I'll explain in a minute. After reading plenty of LinkedIn profiles, it seems quite likely that most people are in fact not everything they pretend to be. Maybe they could do with a little bit of self-doubt. Maybe people should spend some time studying the disappointing affirmations thread on Instagram to kind of knock things down a little bit. But then one of my inner interlocutors kicks in, and he asks if this is a personality thing. Are some people more likely to doubt themselves, while others are more likely to have an inflated view of themselves? And to ask the question is to answer it. That's obviously true. 3 personality traits seem to be implicated here: neuroticism, extraversion, and narcissism. Neuroticism is associated with emotional sensitivity, moodiness, and a tendency towards anxiety, self-doubt, and negative emotional experiences. Now that seems to track pretty closely with imposter syndrome. If you're high in neuroticism, you probably experience imposter syndrome. Extroverts tend to be assertive, enthusiastic, and enjoy being the center of attention. Extroversion is negatively correlated with imposter syndrome. So if you're an extrovert and think you have imposter syndrome, it's likely that you're genuinely terrible at the thing you're worried about. Same with narcissists, who have an inflated sense of self-importance, a high opinion of their own abilities, a need for admiration, and a lack of empathy for others. If you're a narcissist and you think you have imposter syndrome, no, it's not imposter syndrome, you're just awful. So here's the rule. If you're an extrovert or a narcissist, you don't have imposter syndrome. You are actually overestimating your ability. The only people who need to be cured or helped who have a false sense of imposter syndrome are people who are high in neuroticism. So here are some practical tests to decide whether your imposter syndrome is justified or not. First, get feedback from people who know your work and your talents, such as managers or colleagues, and not your mother. Review your past achievements with a skeptical eye. Have you consistently met or exceeded expectations? Try to use objective metrics to counteract your anxiety. You might get an objective read on your abilities if you can take a skill or knowledge test that applies to the area in which you have doubt. You can also try teaching the subject to someone who knows nothing about it. If you can do that without resorting to jargon and inside baseball and all that sort of stuff, then you genuinely understand the topic. Another thing to do is to create a real-world test. For example, to test whether you're actually good at writing email sales copy, your copy should consistently should win an A/B split test, should outperform the competition. Now, there are 2 other things to consider about this. The first is culture. I recall listening to a Scottish theologian who said that his Celtic soul and his mother would both condemn him for mentioning or promoting his own book. Self-promotion is frowned upon in some cultures. You're supposed to downplay your own accomplishments. It's unseemly and embarrassing to praise yourself or even to be praised sometimes. I picked up some of this myself from my mother. I'm uncomfortable with promoting myself. This is similar to, but separate from, imposter syndrome. Modesty is a choice or a cultural trait. Imposter syndrome is self-doubt about your abilities. It's more of an objective thing, or can be objective. The second thing to consider is false humility. Humility doesn't mean saying you're rotten at something that you're actually good at. In a funny way, that's actually a form of pride. Here's a weird example of that. Moses wrote of himself that he was the most humble man on earth, which really messes with your conception of what humility means. Humility doesn't mean beating up on yourself. It means, at least in part, having an accurate view of your own abilities. That, I think, is the real solution. There's a proverb that says, let another praise you and not your own mouth. That's good manners, of course, but more than that, external validation can act as a check on whether you're really good at something or whether you actually are an imposter. So those are my thoughts for today. I'd be curious what you think. Have you struggled with this issue of imposter syndrome? Do you have a different view? I'd love to hear it in the comments. Drop them down below. Thanks so much.